Hi, it's Ellen from EVPL Oakland. Welcome to Chapter Book Storytime. On this week's edition of the Variety Pack, I've got a new fantasy novel to share with you. It's called The 13th Hour by Quinn Sosna-Spear. A lot going on this cover, isn't there? We've got a pocket watch, and looks like parts of the cover of the watch peel back, and there are paintings on the inside. We've got a house on a cliff, but the cliff doesn't seem to be attached to anything. It's a little disconnected from the part of the ground where this girl is. So a lot of different things going on here. I think we need to take a look and see what it's all about. This is available in print at EVPL. Chapter 1 is called The World Inside the Watch. Magic does exist, but only we know how to reach it. That's what my Aunt Jo used to tell me as I was falling asleep on her couch when I was younger. The fireplace was warm and crackled, her blankets were soft and heavy, and her hands would scratch through my hair as she whispered, only for me to hear. You see, Rose, there's a place where anything is possible, and when you go there, you will become more powerful than anyone you've ever met. Me? But I'm small. That doesn't matter when you have magic, does it? How do I get there? I'd ask, although I already knew the answer. You use the watch, of course. Jo would pull the long gold chain from her pocket slowly, link by link, until the pocket watch came into view. It was perfectly round, and the gold was as bright as the fire in the hearth. On the top was a loop, attached to which was a gold thin chain with braided links. Next to the loop was a button. Jo pressed it, and the sides, separated into 12 petals, fell open like a flower. Pictures were carved on the back of each segment of the gold shell. They depicted magical landscapes that would exist only in Jo's fantasy world. In the middle was the clock, with long bronze hands that ticked silently. The first time she showed me, my hand reached out on its own, and Jo clicked it shut. Only Jo was allowed to touch the pocket watch. It's not yours yet, my love, but one day it will be, and then you will hold the key that will allow you to enter the other world. When can I go? When I'm ready to give it to you, she'd say. I knew all 12 realms inside the watch by heart. Jo had told me about her adventures in them and had painted me dozens of pictures. In 10 o'clock, you turned into an animal to escape the giant flowers that followed you. Jo said she was a mink there, which she explained was a lot like if a snake and a hamster had a baby. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a mink. She thought I might be a fox. I always liked foxes after that. Then at 11 o'clock, you could create anything you could think of just by drawing it. If you wanted your own pet dragon, all you had to do was learn to draw one. But you had to be careful, because once it was created, the dragon would take a life of its own. It might bite you or singe off your eyebrows. But though Jo didn't just tell me about the magic, even though that was the fun part, she also told me about the dangers. You had to be extra careful in the magical clock world, because whenever something is that amazing, there must always be something about it that's equally frightening. And it will be your job, Rosie Posy, to save it one day. Why me? Because I'm too old, and because you're the perfect mix of smart, kind, and special. That was always the best part of Jo's stories, when she told me I was special. No one else believed that, and so I would listen to her as she scratched my head and drew pictures for me and gave me lessons on how to survive in the magical realms. I stayed awake for hours more than I would any other night just to hide in her stories for a little longer. She even had a book about the world. The book was encased in red leather and bound with a gold thread. The title was carved in cursive writing that I had thought was just perfect. The middle of the letters were gold as well, chipping only slightly. They read, The 13th Hour. As soon as I grew older, though, I realized that the watch world was just a book. A story that Jo had read and liked. But I still listened and nodded along so that I could be special for just a little longer, too. The next chapter is entitled The Smoke Keeper. Something crawled toward me in the darkness. My head was filled with fog, and in the pitch-black room I couldn't figure out where I was. How did I get there? It was hard to think, but I was soon distracted by the scraping sounds of the thing moving. As it came closer, I could finally see what it was. It's a man, I thought. Sort of, anyway. His arms and legs were too bony inside his bright yellow suit. A top hat shadowed his face. The way he moved, however, didn't look like anyone I had ever seen. He jerked as he pulled himself across the floor toward me. "Stop!" I tried to yell, but it came out as a whisper. My chest was so tight, I couldn't speak. The man said nothing, but I could hear the scratching of his nails as they dragged across the floor. My chest grew even tighter when I saw the nails. They were long, yellow, and cracked, curling toward his palms like claws. I tried to run, but my body was frozen, except for my pounding heart. As the man came nearer, I could finally see his face. He didn't stare at me, just stared through me like an X-ray. But he had no eyes, just dark, empty sockets. His nose was broken, and his lips looked like they had been torn into his face. The scariest thing, though, was his teeth. They were long, yellow, and cracked, just like his nails. Each tooth was as long as my fingers, and together they kept his mouth pried open, like one of those fish that live at the bottom of the ocean. The teeth parted for a second, just long enough for a rattling breath to squeeze through, along with the glittering gray smoke. It's a smoke keeper. I recognized him now and realized, this is a dream. But even though I knew what he was, as the smoke keeper scuttled closer, all elbows, knees, and teeth, I found that I was still afraid. But it's just a dream, Rose. Wake up! It was like the more I realized it wasn't real, the faster the man moved. Wake up! Wake up now! His mouth spread wide, teeth opening. A wheeze rattled across his lips. I could hear Joe's voice in my memory. All you hear is a long death rattle, and then it's too late. Just as he reached me, he whispered, Rosemary. Rosemary! Ah! As soon as my body unfroze, I felt like I was falling. I caught myself just in time and realized, oops, I'm in class. My classmates snickered as they stared at me. I wiped at my cheek and, oh yeah, there was drool. Blood rushed to my face, causing my cheeks to flush. I looked up to see Mr. Topinka staring over my desk, his mustache scrunched up in the way it did when he was mad. Mom always said that I should try to make his mustache scrunch up less. Sorry, Mr. Topinka. What's the question? Well, my first question is, why are you sleeping in my class? More people giggled. Someone kicked my chair from behind. Earth to Miss Marks. My eyes shot up to the front of the classroom. Sorry, Mr. Topinka. Now, why were you sleeping in my class? I don't know. I didn't want to tell him that the real reason I was always tired in class was because I had nightmares at home. That's not an answer. But it's fine. You don't have to explain it to me. I sighed. Thank goodness. You can, however, explain it to your father. He's here to pick you up. Mr. Topinka stepped aside, revealing the small frame of Mrs. Lamprey, the office aide behind him. Mrs. Lamprey will escort you to the office. But my dad was here? But why? He never picks me up. And it was so early. My classmates laughed more as I stumbled to stand. Aunt Jo always told me that if you looked at smoke keepers, at monsters with fear in your eyes, then they would go in for the kill. If they saw fear, then they knew they could win. I know bullies aren't smoke keepers, but sometimes they feel like monsters anyway. So I didn't look at the kids as I followed Mrs. Lamprey. So she goes to the office and sees her father. And her father has come to pick her up because her aunt is in the hospital. She's not very well. Her cancer has come back, and he's taking Rose to go see her. The hospital was all white and smelled like plastic and medicine. I didn't like it. Wes, that's what she calls her father, and I stood in front of the door labeled 1051. That's the room number the nurse gave us. The door was cracked, and I could hear voices from the inside. "I told you I don't want it." Joe's voice. "Oh, Miss Marks, I promise it will help. Just take it." I peeked my head in to see a nurse standing in front of the bed. "And I told you to..." Joe's raspy voice was cut off by loud, wet coughs. The nurse sighed as she stepped away, revealing a thin, pale woman I barely recognized. She was propped up on the white bed by pillows, the covers drawn up to her chin. Her hair was only a bit red now, mixed with mostly white. The most surprising thing, though, was that it was short, just past her ears. Her skin looked looser than it used to. Her eyes were the same, though, a bright, clear green that looked as if they were keeping a secret. Joe had always said she liked my streaky, spotted hazel eyes more than she liked her own. I didn't understand that. Everything else about me was boring. "Will you take it for me?" The nurse held out a little Dixie cup to Joe. When she jiggled the cup, something inside rattled. "Fine." Joe pushed down the covers with one hand. In the other, she clasped something small and gold. After a moment, she set it to her side. I saw just a glimpse of the thing through the folds of the blanket. It was the pocket watch. The nurse spied it too and became transfixed. "Where did you get..." But Joe snatched the Dixie cup out of the nurse's hand and tossed the pill into her mouth. "Now get out!" Joe grabbed the gold watch and shoved it back under the covers. The nurse shook her head as if shaking off a dream. "All right, yes, well, press the button if you need anything, Miss Marks." I barely had time to step to the side of the door as the nurse rushed through. She seemed surprised when she saw me and Wes. "She's a tough cookie, that Miss Marks." I just nodded. I didn't like how the nurse had been staring at the watch. It was the same kind of look a dog gives you when it's sitting under the dinner table waiting for scraps to fall. "Come on, Rosemary." I straightened my clothes as Wes walked through the door. It had been a long time since we'd seen each other. What if she didn't even remember me? What if I wasn't as special as she always thought I was? What if she didn't like how I'd changed? "Lollygagging gets you eaten, Rosy Posy. Get in here already." I couldn't help but smile. It was still the same. I stepped past Wes and saw her face on for the first time in years. Her bright eyes gleamed, warm and magical, even under these horrible hospital lights. "Hey, Joe." "Hey, kid." I walked toward the beds, my hands stuffed deep in my pockets, my feet dragging on the floor. "Pick up your feet. You don't know who's living in the dirt underneath them." My shoes shot up too high as I stepped. I knew it was just one of her stories. Bugs are animals too, Rose. I'm good friends with a particular snail in the 10th hour. Still, it was always easier to listen to Joe than to argue with her. She'd never admit the magic world wasn't real. "Hello, Joanne." I winced as Wes used her full name. Joe didn't like it when people called her that. "Hello, Wesley." I smiled. Wes didn't like when people called him his full name either. "How are you?" he asked her. "I'll be better if you give me some time alone with my niece." I looked from Joe to Wes. He looked like he was about to argue, but he decided against it. He threw up his arms. "Fine. I'll be back in a few." As he walked out, I heard him muttering to himself about how it was always the same with her. Then he slammed the door shut. "Now come closer. I want to show you something," Joe said as soon as Wes had left. She pulled the watch out from under the covers. I couldn't help but stare at it. It was so perfect that it hardly looked real. It's just as I remember it. I wanted to grab for it, to hold it. I needed it. As I reached out my hand, Joe pulled the watch back. It made me angry, like I wanted to snatch it from her. Then I realized what I was thinking. That's weird, I thought, trying to shake off that strange feeling. The watch had a tendency to put you under a spell. "So it still has a hold on you, huh? That will wear off the more time you spend looking at it." "Why did you bring it here with you if..." "Have you been keeping up with your painting and drawing?" she interrupted. I sighed with frustration. Joe did that a lot. I knew she didn't want to talk about the watch anymore, even if I tried. "Every day," I said. And it was true. I drew and painted as much as I could. "You any good?" I don't even want to bother talking to you if you aren't any good." I shrugged. I'd never been good enough for Jo. "Still missing something," she'd say. "Paint me something," she continued, eyes shining. "With what?" I said. "You can't ask me that. This is a competition. If you want to win, you need creativity." I nodded. This had been a game we'd played when I was little. The one where you're supposed to draw or paint a picture using the most unusual tools. The weirdest canvas or utensils won. The reason was so that when you were in 11 o'clock, you could make magical drawings out of anything. I always lost, partially because Jo was the only judge and she was competitive, but mostly because she was always better than I was. Maybe she never let me win just because she wanted me to push harder the next time. If that was true, then it worked. "What should I use?" Jo snorted. "Why are you asking me? If you want to win, you need a plan." I spun around the room looking. I was excited. Actually, I didn't know how long it had been since I'd felt like this. Like I could do whatever I wanted. Her black purse sat on the table beside her. I rummaged through it without asking, knowing what I was looking for. She didn't stop me. "Interesting choice," she said as I pulled out a package of pink stomach pills. Jo always had them, and I suspected these particular pills were probably as old as I was. I then found a small plastic box of Q-tips. I emptied it, snatching a few of the cotton swabs for myself, and filled the box with water. Then I dropped the pills in and crushed them up with a pen cap as they dissolved. Soon the water was bright pink. "You need that?" I asked, pointing to a white sheet folded at the end of her bed. Jo shook her head, face blank. I laid it flat on the floor. "What do you want me to draw?" I asked, already knowing the answer. "Whatever you think I need." So I grabbed a Q-tip and stirred my pink paint with it. Perfect. I swiped the Q-tip against the sheet, producing a long, pale line. I smiled. This might actually work. What she needed was to get out of this horrible place. She needed trees, wind, the sounds of birds and running water, and minks. Many, many minks. I don't know how long I painted in silence, scrambling on my hands and knees, but then it was done. A mural of the place I had imagined. 10 o'clock, Jo's favorite. It was right there in pastel colors. I glanced up at Jo, who hadn't said anything the whole time. She was staring at the painting. "You win," she said, lowering her blankets to her chest. Wait, what?" She smiled, and for a second I thought she might have little tears in the corners of her eyes. Must have been the lights, though. Jo never cried. "You win, kid. You're good enough." "But you didn't get your turn yet." "I don't need it. I can already tell." "But—" "Before you get your prize, however," she interrupted again, "answer me this. Why do you like to make art?" I glanced back at the drawing, not sure of the answer myself. "It's the only thing I'm really good at. It makes me feel worth something," I finally admitted, looking up at her. I wouldn't have told anyone but Jo that. Not Mom, not Wes, not any of the kids at school. But for some reason I thought Jo might understand. Jo the hermit everyone judged and no one understood. No one but me. "Good answer. Now, would you like to see your prize?" "Sure, why not?" I said, unable to imagine what kind of prize she'd find in a boring old hospital room. Then her hands emerged from the covers along with the gold watch. She held it up but said nothing. I tried not to look at the watch again, afraid of what it might do to me. Instead, I unfocused my eyes, looking only at her face. "What do you think?" she asked. "Of what?" "Your prize." Wait, what? She was going to give me the watch for smearing pill juice on a bedsheet? "Are you kidding?" She shook her head, holding the watch out for me to take. But I didn't dare. "But," I exhaled, frustrated, "I don't know if this is a joke or if you're just being silly. That watch is worth a lot of money, a lot more than a drawing." "Rosemary, I have had this watch since I was younger than you. It is the most important thing I own. I have thought long and hard about who I should give it to, and there is no one else. You are the one." "I am not. You should keep it. It's not like you're dying." "If I was, would you take it?" The sounds in the room faded away as I looked at her. "Are you?" After too long, she rolled her eyes. "Not right now, but that's not the point. The point is that I'm giving you a gift, and you're being a little slug after years of ignoring me." The sounds returned as a loud smack in the face. "Are you sure?" I asked finally, now looking to the watch, which seemed to glitter even more than it had when I'd first seen it. "Well, I was more sure a few minutes ago." My fingers rose, grasping for it. Inches before they touched, Jo snatched the watch back into her hand. "First, though, you have to promise me something." I could feel my heart pounding. I knew there had to be a catch. "What?" "There are rules to this watch, Rose." Maybe Jo really was as strange as Mom had always said, or maybe she was just playing with me. "Okay, what are the rules?" "The first rule is that you should never let this watch out of your sight. It stays on you at all times. You never lose it. You never forget it. You never let anyone else touch it. In fact, don't let anyone even see it." I nodded. "The second rule is that you sleep with the watch. Every night it stays on you. Hold it, lie on it, shove it down your pants. I don't care. Just don't let it be seen." That was weirder, but the look on Jo's face told me to ask no questions. "Yeah, sure." "The last thing is that you must fall asleep tonight between 11 and 12. "Huh?" Jo held up her hand, severe. "Don't you dare go to bed before 11 or after 12. If you do, then you have to stay up all night and try again tomorrow. No arguing." "What are you talking?" "No arguing, Rose. That's very important. And when you do fall asleep, I want you to imagine the waves painted on the inside of the watch." I threw up my hands. "Please tell me this is just a joke already." She clutched the watch tighter to her chest. I was surprised by how angry she was. "There's," she began, her voice trembling, a world inside this watch." "Jo, I know you made up those stories." "I'm serious." Her eyes whipped back to me. "Deathly serious. You must be careful with it, Rose. It's important. There's a whole world with people in it. It's alive." "Jo," I began, my heart thumping with such urgency that I could hear it in my ears. She can't really believe all those stories or think they're real, can she? "Do you finally get it?" I nodded. I always thought Jo was just playing with me by pretending the stories about the magical world were real. But if she really believed in them, then she must be sicker than I even realized. "Are you feeling okay? Should I go get someone? Like Wes or a nurse?" I asked, my voice shaking. "No, I need..." Her face looked angry, but then she cut herself off, sucked in a puff of air, and closed her eyes. "All right, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have told it to you like that." "So it was a joke?" She cringed. "No, it isn't a joke. It's my life." My eyes went wide again, and she held up her hands. "I mean, it's that important to me. The hours, the magic, the monsters, they're real. They've always been real, and I just needed you to learn so that you could take over for me. I picked you for a reason." She thrust the watch toward me, leaning her thin body off the bed. I couldn't find the words. "Trust me," she begged. I tore my gaze from the watch and looked into her eyes. "I can't." I started backing away from the bed toward the door. "Rose!" She stretched her thin arms as far as they would go and grabbed a pocket of my baggy jeans, pulling me into her with her bony fingers. "Please believe me. When have I..." Her words became slurred and her mouth dropped. "Jo?" I wasn't thinking after that. My legs just moved on their own, running to the door. I ripped it open and raced down the hall until I found a nurse. "There's something wrong with my aunt." The doctors and nurses come running. Turns out Jo has had a seizure, and Rose and Wes wait as the doctors take care of her, and it's late in the night when Joe is stable and Wes and Rose feel that they can go home. They go to Wes's house. Rose's mom and dad are divorced, and so she's going to stay with her dad that night. As she's changing her clothes, getting ready for bed, she realizes she has the watch in the pocket of her jeans. Joe was able to slip it in right before she had her seizure. And so Rose takes a closer look at this precious watch. I held it carefully, like it was a delicate egg, rubbing my fingers over its smooth surface. But up close, it looked different from how I remembered it, because one of the petals was missing. The one on the very top, 12. I tried to imagine what the picture on the petal had been, but I couldn't quite recall. The strangeness of that fact didn't worry me, however, because the watch was here, and it was mine. My fingers passed over the button on the top, and a tingling shock ran through me. Holding my breath, I pushed it. The petals fell open, just as they had for Joe. I couldn't breathe as I brought it up to my face, drinking in the paintings on each remaining petal. They were truly amazing. The paintings were so detailed and bright that it was hard to believe they weren't real and moving. But they couldn't be of actual places, because in one there was a fiery mountain of 3 o'clock. And in another, 9 o'clock, there was a woman standing in a blizzard, and she was glowing bright white. But I was tired now, the long day finally hitting me. The bed was comfortable, the sky was dark, and the watch I was now holding felt warm in my fist, like it was actually alive or something. The warmth calmed me, as if I were lying by the fireplace at Joe's house. I clicked it open and watched the long hands spin. I imagined Joe's hands scratching through my hair. I stared at the waves painted on one of the petals, a wild ocean that filled my mind with gray. Then I drifted off to sleep, just as the minute hand reached 11:56. Do you remember the rules? Fall asleep between 11 and 12. The next chapter is called 11. The bed rocked under me, and my skin prickled from the cold. Then something hit my nose like a tapping or a dripping. Yeah, that was it. A drip, drip, drip. The realization hit me. It's rain. I opened my eyes. My head was so filled with fog that I couldn't see clearly. I looked down and I realized I wasn't even in my bed. This wasn't my room. It was a rock. I was sitting on a giant rock floating in the ocean. This has to be a dream, I thought. Rocks don't float. Holy moly, I muttered aloud. I crab-walked backward away from the edge. But as I moved, so did the rock, teetering with me, and I had to scramble to the middle to avoid falling over the edge. I'd never learned to swim, even in my dreams. I glanced over the lip of the rock and saw the darkness of the water below. Fog collected above the water, drifting up in spiraling tendrils, creating a blanket of gray that made it impossible to see my hands. Then I noticed that every time a drop hit the surface of the ocean, it created a little hiss and a puff of steam. That doesn't even make sense, I whispered to myself as I huddled in the middle of the rock. Why would rain make steam? And then I remembered. Wasn't there supposed to be a sea at 11 o'clock that was so hot it would burn the skin right off of you? That had to be what was making the steam, because the rain was cool. It had been so many years since I'd dreamed about Joe's stories, I'd tried slapping myself awake. But apparently, that only works in movies. I was trapped. And then I heard something. It was sort of a crackling that shook down to my bones and made my skin itch. It sounded like electricity and heat and danger. Wes would say, "You can't hear danger," but it's the only way I can explain it. I turned to see what was making the noise. Slowly, my blood crawling icy through my veins, sweat prickling through my skin. And there it was, a massive wall planted in the middle of the water. I froze at the sight of it. It was so tall, it was made of some kind of energy and shone many colors that swirled together. It crackled again. My rock was floating toward it, and I was scared. I was going to crash into it. As I got closer to the giant wall, I could see the energy swirling off it in clouds. It looked like glowing smoke, the wisps of which swirled around it. I breathed the swirling energy in. It burned my nose and my throat and my chest. My mind had gone fuzzy. I tried to move, but my arms and legs were shaking so much that it was almost impossible. I didn't understand what the wall was doing to me, but it was too hard to think. I just lay there, belly down, now in the middle of a floating rock. I felt like I was drowning in the smoke. Then I felt something heavy hit the ground beside me, rocking the island. I heard footsteps. And then everything went dark. I breathed in deeply, only kind of aware that I was coughing. I saw a clear glimpse of the sky above, not the white ceiling at Dad's house. I was still dreaming then, and I gasped as I rolled on my side. What is going? So, you're alive! Someone was standing above me, but I couldn't see who it was beyond the brightness of the sun. What are you doing? I asked. Way to be gracious. I was helping you breathe. You got smoke sick. I squinted up and finally saw her. She was tall, taller than me at least. She looked older, too, by a few years. She wore pants that ballooned at the legs and buckled at her calves, a frilled shirt and a velvety coat and a pointy collar. Her shoes were colorful. She wore a glittering mask over her eyes and a belt slung low on her hips, outfitted with a variety of strange tools. A nail, a knife, a piece of white tile. I looked away quickly, blushing. I had stared at her for too long. What's smoke sick? I asked. Ha! She told me you wouldn't know much, but I didn't realize you wouldn't know anything. Jeez. Taking care of you is going to be like taking care of a baby. I coughed again, ignoring her. Even in my dreams, people were jerks. And no thanks for saving me? Sheesh. Thanks, I guess. That didn't even sound sincere. I was in the middle of something, you know. And just because Joe told me that some kid was coming who could save us, I decided to help you. But swimming out to the wall on an islet wearing strange clothes? Why did I bother? My head swam, still filled with smoke, I think. Joe? Wall? Islet? But my mouth formed the words before I could stop it. What do you mean my clothes are weird? Your clothes are weird. I made the mistake of looking up at the girl again. I expected her to get mad, but she just laughed. You are a strange one, aren't you? You remind me of her. I threw my arms up. Nothing she said made sense. I just wanted to get out of here. Wake up, I pleaded with myself. Please, just wake up. This is just a dream, I mumbled to myself, crossing my arms. She glanced back at me with an eyebrow raised. A dream? I nodded, waving my hands through the air. All a dream. She shook her head. She said you might say strange things like that. And you're just a frilly dream pirate. Her face was still blank. I flinched as she suddenly crouched down by me. I don't know why you're supposed to be so special, but no matter who you are, you ought to be more careful. You never know who you're talking to. She sounded so serious. It made me a bit scared, but I found I could neither speak nor look away. Then she flicked me in the nose. Hey! But instead of saying anything more, she stood up. I looked around, rubbing my nose, and realized that I could no longer hear the crackle of the wall. Where are we? I asked. Heading back, she said without looking at me. She stood on the edge of the islet, leaning on it with her toes like it was a skateboard. Back where? Home, or 11, as Joe calls it. The throb in my head ran down my arms. I finally noticed the round thing clenched in my fist. The watch. It was still warm. I opened my hand to look at it and gasped. Inside of the gold pocket watch, it had become an orb of multicolored energy. It was still shaped like a clock, but it glowed and flashed like electricity. Like the wall, I realized. I held it to my ear and listened to it hum. Where did you get that? I looked up at the girl. She was staring at the ball of energy that was once my watch with bold fascination. Like the nurse had. I wouldn't let her have it, not even in a dream. I closed the ball back in my fist, away from her gaze. It's mine, was all I could think of to say. She strode to me, causing the islet to slow down. Let me see it again. No! I shoved the ball of energy into my pocket. She stared at me, and I stared right back. I could tell she was debating something, the way her eyes flickered over to my pocket, to my hand, to my face. But she resigned herself to step back. Fine. Maybe I shouldn't have come out all the way here to save you after all. Why did you come? Joe told us to. Right, but why? She turned back to me, frowning. Because she said you would help us. Help you do what? Destroy the wall. The wall divides us from the other hours. It means that we don't have any freedom. Not like you. You can leave whenever you want. We are trapped here. Why don't you just, I don't know, fly over it or something? She rolled her eyes, turning back to the edge, guiding the eyelet once more. She told us that you would help, but clearly you don't know the first thing about anything. What's your name? She asked. I considered lying, but what could it hurt? We were in a dream, after all. I'm Rose. Oh, that's an awfully bad name. You're not Rosie at all. I'm Fleck. As she said it, she smiled. The freckles on her cheeks shone brightly under the sun. Well, not so, Rosie Rose. It appears we're here. Where? I glanced around her and saw it. We were headed for a much larger island ahead, an island with a city on it. A circle of clouds hovered above it, the city casting ghostly colors on the bottoms of the clouds. From a distance, it was hard to see the people on the island, but it was colorful, loud, and full of movement. It looked like a party. Then Fleck stepped in front of me, blocking my view. Is that 11? She slipped a piece of tile and the nail off her belt. Then she began carving something into it. Sure is. I don't think we should travel there together, though. Wouldn't want anyone to catch us. So we'll split up and meet on land. Joe told you where to go, right? To the cemetery? Wait, what? How are you going to get to shore? Are you planning to swim through fire? She glanced over at me with a half smile. You're not the only powerful one here. Then she looked back down at her tile and finished a few lines. Seconds later, the center of the tile glowed a light purple. Fleck held it out from her body, watching as a large gleaming shape poured from it, growing bigger and bigger. I backed away as the shape formed into a small, delicately carved sailboat that bobbed on the mire. She stepped onto it. The glow subsided, revealing that the boat was made of the same smooth stone as the tile. Okay, that's pretty cool. She looked almost surprised before she smiled. Thanks. See you there. She handled the sails, directing them away from my islet. Rosemary. I heard a faint voice that seemed to drift down from above me. Rosemary. It was growing stronger, closer. It sounded like it was coming from the city. I turned to look toward it. The colors in the clouds pulsated as the voice grew louder. Rosemary. Rosemary, wake up. My eyes burst open. I was hot and sweating. The warmth seemed to come from something squeezed tightly in my fist. The watch. I was lying curled on something soft. It's my bed, I realized, disappointed and relieved at the same time. So, it was only a dream. I heard Wes's voice. Rosemary, can you hear me? Her father is calling to wake her up. Come on, we've got to go. I've got to take you back to school. I thought we were going to the hospital. I'd like to see Joe again. We can't. Joe's gone. Gone? What do you mean gone? Is she dead? No, she's not dead. She's missing. She's run away from the hospital. And so Rose has to go back to school without having done her homework, without having a change of clothes, without anything. She has just enough time to grab her things together, including the pocket watch, and head to school, that place she hates more than anything. And still, Rose wonders, was that really just a dream? Or does that pocket watch have magical powers? She's going to have to find her aunt to get more answers. And for you to get more answers, you can take a look at The 13th Hour by Quinn Sosna-Spear. It's available in print at EVPL. Thanks for joining me today on Chapter Book Storytime Variety Pack. I hope you enjoyed the story. We have a lot of new titles coming in every week. Come take a look. Thank you for joining me. Bye-bye.